In the world of horror gaming, one thing that hasn't changed much in the last 25 years is the influence that the Resident Evil series has had on the scene as a whole, with a reputation unmatched, and a lot of clones to go along with it. Today I'm going to be talking about one of those clones from 2000, Carrier, for the Sega Dreamcast. And when it comes to Resident Evil clones, I tend to get pretty excited to check them out. So there's usually some pretty creative ways they try to separate themselves from that series, usually by adding a couple cool mechanics here and there. The other side of it is that some of these might never have even had a re-release and are basically locked to one system, only making me more curious in hopes of finding that weird hidden gem. The issue that brings up, of course, is price, with some of the English versions of some of these games being totally fucked, so I usually just buy a Japanese copy and Google Translate the text. Voice acting's usually in English anyway. Carrier is of course one of those games fetching a higher price, at least in my neck of the woods, but I got my cheapo Japanese copy and I'm ready for some silly RE style action, bad voice acting and all. So let's take a look at this obscure game released on the Dreamcast that no one played and see if it holds up. Not that well. Alright, so this is going to be another rescue mission going wrong. Let's see what you think. We start with a bit of backstory, explaining that the Northern and Southern Hemisphere's countries are at odds with each other over a resource shortage, with the Northern countries forming the Northern Hemisphere Treaty Alliance, and their goal is to stop the terrorists of the Southern Cross. In 2023, the NTA completed construction of the Heimdall aircraft carrier as a major defence structure, but after travelling back from a successful mission, it has gone silent. This is where we come in to investigate. Alright, so straight off the bat, you're probably thinking, this is fucking stupid. And you'd be right, but so far, I am totally on board with this. On the helicopter, we're introduced to our character, Jack, and his partner, Lieutenant Manning, and we find out our brother is meant to be on the carrier. While approaching, we are fired upon by the ship's defences, causing us to crash.
Everyone out!
We've been separated from Manning, but we find the pilot, Leonard, who is badly wounded. We are told by Colonel Burke over the radio to find a first aid kit for him, then move on with the investigation. As soon as we leave, Leonard gets attacked by an infected human, but we can't get back to help him, so after taking out a couple of the monsters, we move on. We run into Lang, from the other unit, who is checking the intercept system, somehow hasn't seen the monsters? Like, what the fuck? I've been here all of 5 minutes and I've already taken out 2 of those fuckers. In classic 2023 fashion, Lang sends us off to find some activation discs so we can meet up with the other fellas. On our way, we must have accidentally walked in on some kinky shit going down. We try to leave, but the doctor comes in with a gun. We find out that the monsters appear to be some sort of parasite named Ark, and the doctor gives us some goggles to see who's infected, but he seems to have gone nuts and is doing some weird experiments. He gets attacked and runs off, leaving us to handle the monster. Along our travels, we see some weird shit in these rooms overrun with plants, and also run into a few survivors, including one who warns us of an enemy that we might have a bit of trouble seeing. Ah, great, now we've got invisible dudes to worry about. Other survivors seem to be going crazy already, but there's a few who are willing to help out. We get an ID card to access some explosives to make getting around a little bit easier. After giving Lang the discs, we head on our merry way, eventually run into the doctor from earlier, who seems to have got himself in a little bit of a pickle. While trying to turn on an elevator, he gets eaten by a monster and we're forced to take it out. Yeah, this boss fight pissed me the fuck off. Guess what I'll be criticising later in the video. Once that's out of the way, we're able to get to where the Colonel is, and he keeps telling us not to get emotional, like, a lot, and to move on with the mission.
Yeah, I agree, but we can't allow ourselves to be swayed by our emotions.
We get our hands on another ID card from a fella who's in pretty bad shape. We tell him we'll be back for him as soon as possible, but yeah, I don't think that's quite gonna work out. Anyway, Dr. Noble, the Spark team, contacts us, says he's made it to the computer room. He explains a little bit more about Ark, tells us that it's an ancient life form found in the South Pacific. He also mentions that Zoe, the main computer system, may need to be destroyed as it controls all the weapon systems. Along our travels, we are contacted by Manning, who is obviously still going to be alive because they wouldn't just introduce a character at the start of the game and kill them off like that. There's too much interference to make out what she's saying, however, so we have to carry on. We turn on the communication system and are immediately greeted by someone in the security room, but in order to get there we have to turn on the sprinklers to get rid of the cactus blocking the path. In the sprinkler room we come across the next boss battle, and after the last one I was expecting something pretty broken, but it was actually piss easy this time around. Anyway, we turn on the sprinklers and make our way to the security room to meet old mate. We met up with the Colonel and head in, but it appears the fella has had his night cut short after session a bit too hard too early. Yeah, I think we'll put you on the waters now, mate.
When the cactuses finally died, the mutants came in.
Oh, everyone was killed.
Yeah, sorry about that. Moving on from there, we get a call from our brother Bob, who's run into Manning. Tells us some vague shit about Ark, but he'll tell us more when we meet up. We see this guy having a battle with the brain bug from Starship Troopers, but he comes off second best. We head down into what is really not a boss section, but more of a dodge the fucker and flip the switches section. Dr. Noble contacts us once again. He says the ship is filling with water, as the crew were ordered to sink it to stop the parasite from reaching land.
Why would he do that?
He was afraid that the ship would reach land with Ark on board.
Seems pretty extreme.
You sure about that? After literally everything that you've seen so far? Now, for a good hour or so after this, I was running around like a headless chicken, because I got fucking lost. But eventually I'm hit with a radio transmission from Manning, so I did something right. Oh, and Ark has apparently attached itself to the nuclear core or some shit, but more importantly, we've got the keycard to our brother's room. While we're in his room, Manning shows up. We have a bit of a yarn about getting out of this mess and move on, grabbing a grenade launcher on the way. I then proceed to spend the next hour being completely fucking lost again and completely cracking the shits. Finally, we meet up with Bob, who tells us more about Ark, explaining that it's a plant infestation, and the monsters are only drones that carry the seeds. Before splitting up, we come up with the bright idea of sinking the ship to fix the problem, which we already fucking established is the only way to deal with it. Jesus. We run into Lang and Manning being sus as fuck with this capsule, but it kind of just gets ignored, and we soon get a call from Bob, who's gotten himself in a bit of mischief, making us run all the way back to where he is. We spot him being attacked and have to save him, after which he gives us a key and tells us to leave before shooting himself. We proceed back to where we were going before being rudely interrupted by our brother being killed. We need to help Dr. Noble, who tells us Ark has gotten into the computer system. On our way there, it's of course boss fight time again. And it's fucking broken! Oh my god! Just get this fucking game over with. We finally beat it. Don't you fucking dare try and phase 2 this shit. Good. We meet Lang, who's being sus again, and we finally meet the doctor, who's gone crazy and infected, and after some more running around there, felt like it took 5 fucking hours. We have a quick chat with Ark, and then finally it's time to blow up the ship. Before we can leave, however, the Colonel is attacked, in what manages to be a cutscene so great, I almost forgave the shit I had to go through to reach it.
That's an order!
Colonel!
The partitions are going to close! Hurry! Don't make my death meaningless!
Colonel! Colonel! Colonel!
This is so incredibly bad, it almost makes up for the shit boss fight that follows it. Almost. Anyway, we get away, and while we're passed out, Lane gives this preachy little speech about the world and is starting to come around to the idea of this Ark thing while holding the sample.
Beginning. Maybe what this is saying is not such a bad idea after all.
Well, that was interesting. While the game manages to fumble its story in almost every single way, the bad voice acting at least adds some charm to the mix. Speaking of fumbling, let's talk about the mixed bag that is the gameplay. Now, as a Resident Evil clone, there's a lot that you've seen here before, but keep in mind, this came out the same month as Code Veronica. This of course means it's difficult to look at a game like this without making comparisons to Code Veronica, and while this game has a few unique features, there's certainly a noticeable difference in quality overall. Starting off with one of my main positives though is the setting. Being stuck on this ship out in the middle of the ocean is great for a game like this, and with how the game sets you up, being shot down by the ship's defences helps with the overall feeling of isolation. You're only going to be able to get out of here by getting on with a mission, and outside help is not an option. The overall atmosphere of the carrier works well, as you're stuck in a lot of dark hallways and bloody rooms, but the few moments where you do go outside, it's not really much better with the miserable weather and the greyness all around. The map works fine enough as well, and it's got its own version of finding keys for different rooms and a little bit of puzzle solving sprinkled in. Throughout the different areas, you'll run into different NPCs, which are often useful, if only for getting some ammo or health items from, but sometimes they'll clearly be a bit far gone, or even infected. I think having these people spread throughout is a good addition overall, and shows that you're there to save people and not just gather information. Graphically, you'll notice that the game isn't quite up to the level of Code Veronica, and the NPCs look pretty wonky, but given the budget/era, the levels look great and the main characters look decent enough, and hey, the monsters are pretty cool. Now, while the monsters in this game are mostly just your standard zombies with a twist, it definitely plays into my soft spot for this type of game. They're not really a freshly dead human, but a host to a parasite, which is terrifying, of course. The creatures' faces splitting up or the spikes coming out of their chests are exactly the kind of details I want in my late 90s, early 2000s horror game experience. And on top of that, the invisible enemies are actually a nice touch. It's frustrating rushing through a room only to be grabbed by an enemy that you couldn't even see, but it's actually effective in making you second guess how you approach different areas. I just wish they copied Resident Evil's run button rather than making it pressure sensitive to the analog stick. Talk about fixing what isn't even broken. Of course, there are enemies that you will see throughout the game, which can be equally as horrific, with some larger dudes getting in the way that you'll need to deal with using the machine gun. And the enemies that you come across slowly moving through the water are pretty interesting. The invisible dudes really add the most depth to the gameplay in the end though, as the goggles that you were given to spot who's infected are also used to spot these guys. And it feels like the sort of thing that could be added into games now in a super effective way. As cool as the enemies are, a game like this needs satisfying combat. Carrier brings a few interesting things to the table, with mixed results. In your typical old school Resident Evil game, you'll have tank controls, and aiming will involve locking on, and you can either aim straight, up, or down. Carrier uses the tank control system, but adds a little bit more freedom with the aiming, giving you the option to target specific parts of the body. This is very useful to make sure you're getting consistent headshots. It can be a bit clunky though, and at times you will get a bit lost while aiming. Firing in succession with a pistol can be a bit clunky too, and it can make you slow down your shots to make sure you're actually hitting something, which is almost neat, but it's actually shit when you enter a room and there's 3 dudes in your face. Now, changing weapons in a flash doesn't necessarily mean that you have to open the inventory, as there's a weapon select function using the left trigger, which is another almost neat mechanic, except you have to be standing still to use it, further adding to the game's clunkiness, so I mostly just use the classic way of opening the pause menu. Speaking of weapons, there aren't many, and I spent my whole playthrough using almost exclusively the pistol, machine gun, and standard explosives, which are just used to clear doorways anyway most of the time. There were different explosives you could use, as well as a grenade launcher, and even though I kept saving these up, I never really used them as it became too clunky to do so in boss fights. The game isn't terribly difficult most of the time either, so you'll never be running dreadfully low on supplies, and you don't have a limited inventory. Most of the difficulty came from me trying to figure out where the fuck I was going in some parts of the game. Now, if I wasn't fighting the level design, I was fighting the fucking frame rate. This game has a habit of chugging, at times seemingly for no reason. And while I don't usually complain about this sort of thing, it's bloody hard to ignore in this game. Add this to another Code Veronica comparison because that game is smooth as butter, but here you'll constantly be hit with slowdown, even when there isn't a crowd of enemies. The game doesn't struggle with load screens, which is a plus, but this is one of those things that when compared to the game that did everything better, it really shows its lack of polish. Now there's a few justifiable criticisms thrown at Code Veronica for some of the boss battles, but where that game might have stumbled, this game fell off the fucking deep end. The boss fight where the crazy doctor dies is completely fucking broken. You have to place these bombs down to damage it, but the controls are so stubborn and you keep getting hit when you try and do anything that it just makes it a headache to finish. It's not that it's even that hard either, provided you've picked up enough health items, it's just tedious and poorly designed. They seem to have gone the opposite way with that boss dude in the corner of the room because that was insultingly easy, but given how they designed the rest of the game overall, that's almost a welcome addition. Don't expect that to be how the rest of the bosses go, because the bloke that you fight in the water is one of the most fucking frustrating shit boss fights I've ever had the misfortune of getting through. The camera is shit for starters, and you can't even aim your grenade launcher properly at him, which is a weapon I've been saving ammo for this whole fucking game, and just decide to not use it at all because there's no point. It takes way too long to kill, and you're just running around trying to get the right opening with the machine gun. Oh, and did I mention the controls are shit? They finish it off with a classic uninspired battle where you run around in circles, occasionally shooting the baddie, but not really doing anything until the game mercifully decides to end. I can deal with a bit of clunkiness, but these boss fights are seriously shit, and this game needed some serious work to get it up to scratch. But with that said, let's wrap this up with my final thoughts. I went into this game pretty optimistic and ready to really enjoy a classic Resident Evil clone, but unlike those RE titles, I couldn't really bring myself to enjoy the experience as much as I'd hoped. There are good elements here, no doubt, but the game is constantly dragged down by these overly maze-like levels that get pretty dull after a while, and the lack of polish with the controls just leaves me wondering what more this game could have been. There's a good game hidden in here somewhere, it just managed to get away every time I thought I'd found it. You know, I'm a sucker for a cheesy horror game from this era. While this game had a solid start, it did kind of wear me down, so I'm going to have to slap it with a 6 out of 10. Would have been a 5, but it gets an extra point for actually trying to add some cool little features in there. It's not really what I hoped it would be, but hey, it'd benefit greatly from a remake. That'd be cool. Anyway, that's all from me today. I'll catch you next time.